It's 2007. In the previous 2 years, Steven Soderbergh made a low-budget masterpiece, Bubble, and somehow convinced Warner Brothers to finance a black and white film about the aftermath of World War II that he promised would leave audiences depressed. Now it's time to repay Warner's faith and dollars with his second ever sequel, Ocean's 13.
But don't worry, he's already in pre-production on a 4.5-hour, 2-part biopic about Cuban revolutionary Che Guevara.
We are entering peak Soderbergh, and I am here for it. Listeners, we hope you are too. Welcome to the Filmographers podcast, where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time. I'm Keir Graff.
And I'm Michael Moreci. In our first season, we're turning the spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, one of Hollywood's most fascinating and versatile directors. We discuss why each of his films succeeded or failed, always looking at them in the context of the Hollywood landscape at the time they were released.
As always, we want to know how working artists make a living doing what they love, because we are working artists who make a living doing what we love. We hope you'll join us on our journey to watch or rewatch all of Soderbergh's movies. Mike, let's get right into it. Please kick us off with your one-sentence summary.
The Ocean's Gang is back once again, and this time it's personal. And they're back in Las Vegas, the place where it all began, and may also be the place where it all ends, as the boys attempt their most daring heist yet.
They should have hired you, Mike. According to IMDb, Ocean's 13 used the following taglines, which all suck. What are the odds of getting even? 13-1. Actually, I should read these in my movie trailer voice.
Oh, yes, please.
What are the odds of getting even? 13-1. Revenge is a funny thing. How to steal $500 million in 3.5 minutes? If you cross one ocean, you face them all. Revenge is a funny thing, but what are the odds of getting even?
Ooh, boy, I read these in advance. I wasn't prepared for how bad they actually are when spoken aloud. If you cross one ocean, you face them all. What is...
I mean, I'm not entirely convinced these are real, but they're on IMDb and nobody's taken them down. Anyway, I prefer to imagine an alternate universe in which Soderbergh has been counting down and getting ready to make Ocean's 1, which will be a lot easier to summarize.
It's a reverse big store. Doesn't matter if we win, as long as the casino loses. Which means that we have to rig craps, blackjack, slots, and roulette, all in our favor.
Jeez, could you make it any more complicated?
Okay. This can't be done.
We don't have the manpower,
the time, or a way in.
You in yet? I hate that question.
So who's going to be our super high roller?
He owns all the air south of Beijing.
The air.
Try building something larger than 3 stories in the Tianjin province. See if his name comes up in your database then.
All right, time for the starter's gun.
Let me tell you what you don't want. Your hotel in a twisted heap of steel and glass. That's what you don't want. The nose plays. And the nose does play. The nose plays.
This is great.
It's huge.
Great stuff.
Thanks.
If any of you try to break our deal, you'll be dead.
Pay me my money.
All you need to do is fill it.
There are a couple of characters here I'm not too sure about.
I know people who really know how to hurt.
Well, I know all the guys that you'd hire to come after me. They like me better than you.
You okay?
Yeah, no, I just bit into a pepper.
Is that? Are you watching Oprah?
Mike, when I was doing research for Ocean's 12, I found this quote from Soderbergh.
Nobody was asking for a sequel. The studio wasn't asking for a sequel. None of the actors were asking for a sequel. This is something that I generated. And then you can absolutely be sure that after 12, nobody was asking for another one. And I was the one that went to the studio and went to the cast and said, I have another idea. I think it's an idea that'll close everything out and be fun to do.
But while I was doing research for Ocean's 13, I found this little snippet.
Remember, I told you it was always a trilogy. I told you that. The whole plan was, and I told you, I always wanted to go back to Vegas. You can't go back to Vegas on the second one. That was this was not an accident.
Now, I think he's one of the most intellectually honest filmmakers working today, but even Soderbergh can be guilty of a little revisionist history.
Or maybe, okay, maybe he's running a Danny Ocean style con on us, and eventually he'll be claiming the plan all along was to make Ocean's movies until George Clooney was as old as Carl Reiner.
or older. I'd buy a ticket to see Danny Ocean ride a mobility scooter into the Bellagio, which now has an assisted living wing.
I would. I mean, they just made that movie Thelma. That's like I think it's kind of like a heist movie where she is older. Yeah, we can pull it off.
And I like to think George Clooney's going to have a sense of humor into old age. He seems to be able to poke fun at himself.
I agree.
Well, anyway, let's get into it. What did you think of Ocean's 13, and where do you think it ranks in the trilogy?
Both good questions. I like this movie a lot. I really do. It's funny because in our episode where we covered Ocean's 12, we talked about how some critics praised that movie for being so daring to throw the heist formula out the window. And instead of that, they never really made clear of what, 12 was supposed to accomplish instead of being a heist movie. They were just kind of satisfied with the postmodern impulse to tear something down, but never seemed to care what was erected in its place, which is one of the exact problems that, at least in my opinion, that 12 suffers from.
Sure.
For my money, though, Ocean's 13 is weird. It actually accomplishes this objective much better than 12 does, probably unintentionally, but just because it throws a different part of the Ocean's 11 playbook, like the typical heist movie playbook, out the window. Like the lengthy setup that, gets us back to where we want to be, which is the gang is all gathered back together and they're doing another score. Like Ocean's 13 is pretty crazy. The economy of the first act, like there basically isn't a first act.
Cut to the chase.
Yeah, I mean they really do away with the let's get the band back together, which in 12, I think you were the one to point out in 12 was long and tedious, and like how does Benedict know where they all are and how do they not warn each other? Like
that movie takes a million years to get going.
It takes too long. Yes, exactly. Especially with a cast this big.
Yeah.
That's also a factor here. But 13 offers really the minimal setup, and I think it's a pretty brilliant decision. You don't need the long, tedious intro getting this huge cast back together. You know who they are at this point. You know what they do. All you really need for them to get going is a reason. And in this case, it's Ruben's heart attack and the revenge plot against Al Pacino. And you can take that and you're off and running, and that's what 13 does. And I feel like that breaks its mold a little bit. It breaks its mold enough where arguably 12 maybe broke the mold a little too much. But that said, while I did enjoy that, I always like seeing the boys back together. The boys are back in town. I like seeing them. They have great chemistry. I think we'll talk about a little bit how the chemistry was like maybe a little too much chemistry this time.
They say
around.
You can never have too much chemistry. They're wrong.
They're wrong. There was, they kind of... they surpassed it a little bit, but there is a few things that I didn't love. And it's, I do like it jumping in with both feet, like I said, and losing what would have been, that 20 minutes of reassembling everyone. But that 20 minutes now, if you're cutting that out, needs to be made up elsewhere. And in this case, it was more heist. And you can have arguably too much chemistry. You can also have too much heist. These heists had heists. I feel like I'm contradicting myself in saying that, but I think both things can be true. Like it's good to jump right back into the heist, right back into the meat and potatoes of what the Ocean's franchise is, but you can also have there be too much. Like the plot itself plays out like a never-ending series of these Russian nesting dolls stacked on one another. It's a scheme after scheme after scheme, and not all of them seem totally necessary. I would have preferred a more direct route through the entire narrative, which Soderbergh, he did take that direct route, but I wish he would have like coupled that with a shorter runtime. Like you could have just truncated that first 15 minutes, 20 minutes to 5 or however long it is in Ocean's 13 and just had a runtime of an hour 45, which would have been totally fine. It's still a good movie, but this movie is 2 hours and 2 minutes, and starting in Act 2 basically made it feel a little long for me. But like I said, the charm is still strong. The movie looks great. I think this, as much as I love the European feel, I had some quibbles about the lighting in Ocean's 12 that I thought like the lighting and the staging I felt were a little bit weird and off and unclear at times. And I feel like in this time around, Vegas looks great. The characters look great. The setups look great. I really, really loved how this movie looked. I think it looked better than 12. And yeah, I despite that nitpicky stuff, which I guess is not nitpicky necessarily, it's a thumbs up for me, Gene. I mean, it's a thumbs up for me, Keir.
Am I Gene this time? I guess it's my turn.
I snuck it in.
My turn to be Gene.
I get to be Roger. Anyway, what about you? Ocean's 13 thoughts?
I completely agree with you that it is about 15 minutes too long. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that part of the problem, it's a second act problem because the second act feels far too long. It doesn't, it's a little out of balance. Before I get too much into Ocean's 13, though, I want to back up and talk a little bit more about Ocean's 12, because I feel like you can't discuss these movies without kind of comparing them. I've been thinking about Ocean's 12 ever since we recorded our episode on that, and I feel kind of increasingly lame about my hatred of Ocean's 12. After all, it's Soderbergh's favorite, and I do appreciate, at least intellectually, all the reasons he said he likes it, right? It's playful, it's loose, and it tries to take the franchise somewhere different. And yet, it just didn't work for me. 13 takes fewer risks, but because of that, I think it comes closer to delivering the pleasures of Ocean's 11, but it makes me feel a little lame because I like it for taking fewer risks. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's lame. I think it's just also like, when is it appropriate to take risks, and do the risks work? Which I think we agreed that some of the risks worked, but the results of the risks were really uneven. The movie Ocean's 12, I think I was gentler with Ocean's 12, but I still realized like it was a very peak and valley movie that had like, it was like good a minute and then bad a minute, and you know, like it was just all over the place.
Okay, I'm back to hating it. I think you're right. It's so interesting because we're going to be talking next week about a movie that's very daring and very risky, and those risks really pay off a lot for Soderbergh. But here it's interesting because he takes risks with what is arguably a more safe commercial prospect, and those just didn't work. At any rate, enough about 12. I liked 13 pretty well. I honestly don't think we needed 12 or 13, and Soderbergh's career and my life as a film fan would have been perfectly fine if he moved on after making the first one. But, he obviously enjoys making them, and tons of people enjoy watching them. And I pretty much enjoy watching them. They're arguably the most popular things he's ever made. But I just didn't engage with 13 in the way I engaged with the films he made immediately before and after it. We're discovering that the mid-2000s are pretty amazing time for Soderbergh movies, which just makes this one feel a little flat.
I'd never occasion to think about this, but you're right, because like when you see where this movie is sandwiched between, it's like you've got correct me if I'm wrong, it's like Bubble, Good German, Ocean's 13, and Che.
Right.
It's such a weird place in his filmography.
It is such a weird place. I mean, yes, it makes sense in the Soderbergh cinematic universe, but it's just like he's doing these amazing grown-up kind of arty films, and then it's back to like Playtime with the Gang. And again, it's fine. In a vacuum, it's a very enjoyable film. You're in a hotel room, you're on a plane, it comes on, you're not going to regret that time. But at the same time, I feel like Ocean's 11 was a terrific confection, an absolute delight. And if he would have just left it at that, it probably would have been even more pleasing to me. Again, I keep talking about the whole trilogy. This movie in particular, I will say that it just delivers more of what I want from an Ocean's movie than 12 did. It brings the gang back to Vegas, where the series feels most at home and the visuals are the most fun. Even though the ridiculous bank casino could never exist, I mean, you cannot have balconies in a place where you're worried about, card cheats.
I never thought about that. That is a really good point.
Yeah. Go to Vegas. You will not find balconies overlooking card pits.
Yeah.
It also brings Matt Damon's Linus forward in a way that 12 tried to do, but didn't quite nail, I would say. And I think he helps it because, as you were saying earlier, I think the Danny and Rusty vibe is getting a little rusty. I mean, It is like they're kind of coasting on chemistry alone, almost.
Yeah, that is specifically what I was saying. So you read my mind. It's just got to a point where it's a little too much of them completing their own sentence and talking in code. I don't think either one of them said anything the entire movie. Like, they said stuff that was like, "Oh, we're going to do a Barry Lyndon." I don't know why I said a Barry Lyndon, but but whatever, the code is, and then one person would say something oblique and the other person would finish it obliquely, and which is kind of fun, but substantively it was more
fun earlier on.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. By the way, I think a Barry Lyndon would be a con involving like a historical reenactor wearing period costume.
And you know what? All natural lighting. Maybe that's why.
I also think that with Al Pacino as Willie Bank, we finally have a villain who's a worthy adversary. I mean, yes, we all know we're just waiting to see him taken down, but at least from his very opening scene where he betrays Ruben and induces a heart attack, he's somebody we want to see taken down in a way that I don't think we ever quite did with Andy Garcia's Terry Benedict.
No.
I mean, Al Pacino just brings it. He's Al Pacino. Yes. I'm not going to do an impression. But he just brings that Al Pacino-ness, and it's perfect in a movie like this.
Totally.
I feel sexist for saying this, but I do think the movie benefits from the absence of Tess and Isabel. Reportedly, Julia Roberts and Catherine Zeta-Jones opted out because their roles weren't going to be prominent enough, which is both fair and a decision that ultimately benefits the movie. Nothing against them as actors, but 11 characters is already a lot to fit in. And if Soderbergh had really kept adding gang members by the numbers, it could get farcical. Just imagine Ocean's 20. It would be like, it's a mad, mad, mad world.
Maybe. Well, you know what? We might get Ocean's 20, but I agree with you totally. There was just no room for them. Maybe he'll just make an Ocean's movie where a woman isn't on screen, period.
Oh, God.
Not even in the background.
Yeah.
See if anyone notices.
I will also say, too, like the plan to break the bank is as preposterous as ever, but even that doesn't bug me anymore. 3 movies in, I fully accept what you have called the world rules. And, of course, Danny Ocean's gang can procure not one, but 2 of the machines used to dig the tunnel. They're just that good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, I don't even think about it at this point as I'm watching it. I'm just, when whatever Basil's doing to manufacture the earthquake and they need another one and it costs $35 million, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's just another little hiccup. They've got to go get $35 million.
Right.
My quibbles, which interestingly, it's a kind of a shorter list, but what you alluded to, you didn't even allude to it. You said it directly. You said it very well. There were too many subplots. There's too much going on. Given that the gang's objective of breaking the bank by making everyone a winner is so impressive and really such a great thing to try to pull off, maybe we didn't also need all the secondary objectives and subplots, particularly about trashing Bank's chances of winning this 5 diamond award, and actually stealing his diamonds from a room at the top of the casino. It just felt overstuffed. And I think that if we would have lost 1 or 2 of those things, we could have hit that hour and 45-minute runtime that could have made this really the perfect summer movie. I would give Ocean's 13, 2.5 or 2 3/4 stars if that's allowed. Yes, the thrill is gone, but let's just enjoy a nice bucket of popcorn and move on to the fascinating Shay.
Yeah.
That's it. End of podcast right there.
Yeah. I mean, so I think so I didn't answer your second question, but I'm going to answer, I guess, for both. 'Cause I think our rankings align. It's 11, 13, 12.
Yeah. Yeah, and probably anybody who has listened to our other episodes, that would be abundantly clear. But I don't want to assume that everybody out there is a super fan. Maybe this is their first listen to the Filmographers podcast. But yeah, I agree completely. The first one stands head and shoulders above. Ocean's 13 is a respectable entry, and Ocean's 12, if you're going to skip one, skip that one.
Yeah, well,
Although,
you can. They bring everybody back, including, and I noticed that when you were talking about villains, you left the Night Fox out.
I did leave out the Night Fox. Yeah, that felt just sort of, I don't know, what did you think? Did you think it was worth bringing the Night Fox back?
Yeah, because I like the Night Fox.
You would, Roger. Yeah, I felt like that's a big ask to bring Vincent Cassel back for such a small cameo, really. But I mean, given that they're throwing the kitchen sink in, I guess why not the Night Fox too?
Yeah, I mean, if they really are like closing out the trilogy, as Soderbergh says, and so far he's maintained that.
I don't believe him. He's running a long con on all of us.
Probably. But that said, if that's true, yeah, you bring everybody back together. Benedict's back. You bring these players back together. You put them all on the field. Even Eddie Izzard, who is a product of 12 as well. You bring them all back and you just throw them into the blender and see what happens.
When we come back, we're going to get really explainy about everything.
Man, you're getting on like a sexist tear. That's like, are we mansplaining here?
We're men, so I think it is by definition mansplaining.
Yeah, it's true. Plus, we are talking about a bro movie. And speaking of bro movies, I have a fun fact for you, Keir. Ocean's 13 actually introduces us to the Bourne universe.
Go on.
Yeah, so check this out. To accommodate Matt Damon's schedule, he was filming the Bourne Ultimatum at the time of Ocean's 13's production. Soderbergh went to Damon in London while he was making this Bourne film and filmed a quick scene of Linus, talking to Danny on the phone. And not only that, not to miss a fun opportunity, Soderbergh actually filmed it like a Bourne movie. It's shaky handheld, bluish gray scale, color correction, even like this heightened intensity. It's this weird, fun in-joke. It's been posted around Twitter and stuff, so it exists. I didn't discover this by any means, but like, it's just fun. Like, he's in this Bourne moment that's shoved into Ocean's 13. You didn't really need the scene, I don't think.
It was a joke that went completely over my head, but that is so great. I remember thinking, like, why is he going so blue scale with this scene? And I even knew that they filmed it in London because Damon was there to film a Bourne, and it just didn't even dawn on me that he was doing it in the style of Bourne. And of course, now that I think about it, yes, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. I mean, and we'll talk more later about the weirdly, maybe not this, I think it's next episode, we'll talk about the weird fascination of some critics of pegging Soderbergh as this super serious guy. He's doing stuff like this all the time. He seems really fun. I don't know why everyone thinks he's like this cold intellectual. He's hilarious.
I feel like almost every episode we mention how much fun he has making movies.
The specs aren't on the gray market, the black market, or any other market. And all I keep hearing is there's never been a system like this. Now, I found out where they designed it, but I can't even get in the building. I've blown all my buy money, my bribe money, 4 of my best IDs, and I am nowhere. Well, not only am I nowhere, I'm pretty sure I'm being followed.
Hi, this is Keir with a brief interruption to our regular programming. Mike and I truly hope you're enjoying our discussion of Ocean's 13, but once again, we're asking for your help.
Keir, not the NPR bit again.
Mike, we're talking about a sequel. I'm doing kind of a meta thing here.
Okay, go on.
This is not part of our regularly scheduled pledge drive, but listeners, we need your help to make up for a budget shortfall in our current fiscal quarter. Even with our generous grants from the MacArthur Foundation and the estate of Joan B. Kroc, we're having trouble making ends meet. Our Hollywood correspondent has been sleeping in his car.
None of that is real. None of it.
Well, they are part of the Filmographers cinematic universe. They're just not real yet.
We have entered the arena of the unwell.
Listeners, we need your help. Please join our Patreon community at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. Our free tier, the Limey, gives you access not only to all of our regular episodes, but also our monthly newsletter. For only $2 per month, The Magic Mike, you'll get all of our regular episodes ad-free, plus our monthly newsletter, access to listener polls, and other bonus content like essays and extended versions of the show.
You know, the Magic Mike really should be our top tier. I'm just saying.
For $4 per month, the Cisco, you'll get everything we've already mentioned, plus our every other month Patreon exclusive episodes, like our one about the films Soderbergh didn't make and our Singani tasting. All that for an amount that's less than your daily Starbucks, Mike.
That joke is a sequel.
Ocean's 13 is a second sequel, so that earns me a second helping of redundancy. Finally, superfans who want to be do-gooders like Aaron Brockovich can support us at our highest level of $6 per month. For that, they get everything I've already mentioned and an every other month commentary track. Again, pardon the interruption. And we now return to our regularly scheduled programming.
I suppose operators are standing by to take your call?
Don't be ridiculous, Mike. This is a podcast, not live radio. Visit patreon.com/The Filmographers Podcast today to show your support. Mike, I'm kind of tired of talking about the Oceans franchise. I mean, how much can we say? Today, I don't want to focus the meat of our discussion on the Soderbergh-Clooney bromance, the Soderbergh-Clooney-Pitt love triangle, or even the Soderbergh-Clooney-Pitt-Damon polycule. And I now regret my use of the word meat in the preceding sentence. I'm sorry about that.
Go on.
The Oceans movies are entertainments, and they are, to some degree, review-proof. So let's talk filmmaking. In our discussion of Ocean's 11, you talked about the way Soderbergh handles pacing through camera movement, zooms, cutting, and other techniques. Today, I want to talk about how Soderbergh handles exposition. And by this, I mean mostly verbal exposition, because technically all of filmmaking is exposition, using images and words to tell a story. But here, there's a whole lot of explaining or mansplaining going on. Ocean's 13 is a heist movie, and it's maybe even more accurate to call it a caper film, a comedic subgenre of the heist movie. I'm going to quote Roger Ebert's delightful definition of a caper. The classic caper genre had rules set in stone. It began, 1, with an impregnable fortress, vault, casino, museum, or even Fort Knox. Then we met 2, a group of men who hoped to impregnate it. There was 3, a setup about the defenses of the fortress, and 4, a chalk talk in which the mastermind told the others what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. This had the advantage of also briefing the audience so that the actual caper could proceed in suspenseful silence while we understood what they were doing and why. Ebert goes on to complain, the modern caper movie, such as Steven Soderbergh's Ocean's 13, dispenses with such tiresome exposition and contains mostly action and movie star behavior. Only the characters know what the plan is, and we are expected to watch in gratitude and amazement as they disclose it out of their off-screen planning and plotting. Which I think is a very fair critique of Ocean's 12, which ironically Ebert likes better, and a somewhat fair critique of Ocean's 13.
Yeah, I'm kind of puzzled by that. Because that's, and you pointed out really well, and I think that was one of your big hangups, and it was a hangup of mine too. You said it perfectly, that Ocean's 12 didn't play fair.
Right.
And you can say the same thing of Ocean's 13 if you can actually like make sense of it. But like Ocean's 12 definitely doesn't play fair. So I'm surprised that he kind of, he slaps Ocean's 13 on the wrist, but not Ocean's 12.
I'm going to just chalk that up to the perils of being somebody who sees a movie and writes the review the same day. Sometimes you're going to be a little inconsistent. Whether we like it or not, in the Oceans trilogy, Soderbergh has created his own thing, a carefully constructed vehicle where verbal exposition is used as explanation, foreshadowing, and sleight of hand. He lets us in on just enough that we think we can follow what's happening, while at the same time hiding key information from us. And of course, at the same time, Ocean's gang is hiding things from their enemies, allies, and sometimes each other. In early heist movies like Criss-Cross, remade by Soderbergh as The Underneath, Rififi and Bob Le Flambeur, the heists are smaller and simpler than what audiences expect today. The heists in the Oceans movies are much, much more complex. And if everything was laid out by Danny in a chalk talk at the start of the movie, viewers would get restless. Also, Soderbergh doesn't want to repeat himself. He pulled off a great version of that in Ocean's 11, so he has to do something different now. There are a lot more moving parts and a lot more information that has to be conveyed to the audience as the gang plans and executes the robbery. So, obviously a director needs all the tools in his toolbox every time he makes a movie, but I would argue that in this kind of movie, skillful exposition is the most important tool for ensuring the audience's enjoyment. Would you agree on that? Disagree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I think it's a really, really great point that you bring up. It's funny how some film genres that superheroes, some genres can get away with being entirely formulaic down to using basically a template, while others, like the caper flick, like you say, are never allowed to pull the rabbit out of the same hat twice. I'm thinking also, when you were describing this, I was thinking of, have you ever seen the Now You See Me movies?
Oh, yeah. I saw the first one.
Yeah, the second one is pretty good still, but you feel the strain. Like, it's the same thing there. It's the sleight of hand.
Yes.
I mean, granted, that movie sets you up really for the sleight of hand because they're magicians,
Yes.
So they're really saying, hey, we're going to have some, I don't know what the magician, whatever the names are called. I'm thinking of like The Prestige, where Michael Caine lays out the acts of the acts of a trick. But anyway, it sets you up for knowing there's going to be some, again, lack of a better term, sleight of hand. And then 2 has to like do it in a totally different way, and it feels like such a strain because you have to have, the chalk talk, but you can only do so much.
Yeah.
You can, in those movies that you mentioned, were movies that I love, like the suspense is built on like, will the characters make it out? Will they get the heist? It's not about how are they going to fool the audience.
Right.
Which has become a new wrinkle in all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that makes it harder.
And I think like kind of that crystallized for me in thinking about this movie and in a way, thinking of Soderbergh's heist movies and this new generation of heist movies as their own thing is important because they're descendants of those early heist movies, but to measure them directly against them may be to miss the point. I prefer the classic style myself, but obviously there are some pleasures in these new ones as well. So let's look at a few of the ways Soderbergh handles exposition in Ocean's 13.
These kind of movies are all about what information you're giving out when. And the good news for us about sort of assembling the movie quickly, we'd come in pretty significantly under budget when we finished principal photography. We had the luxury of sitting down and basically asking ourselves if we could do anything to make this even better, what would we do?
That was actually a great luxury because Brian and I like to err on the side of being completely incomprehensible. And so this was a great opportunity to actually make the audience understand what happens in the movie.
Now, spoken exposition is always hard. So you just have to make it as plausible as possible. You already referred to the beginning where instead of opening with the chalk talk, they basically come up with an excuse to do the explanation in a different way. There's going to be a lot of verbal explanation in Ocean's 13. Apparently, this is something they came up with later in shooting. Basically, instead of having Danny explain it to the guys, instead Soderbergh comes up with the conceit that they've already made the plan but want to troubleshoot it, so they pay Roman $100,000 to come in and consult. I agree with you. This sequence is too long and kind of wears out its welcome. But on the other hand, I applaud the effort to try to handle it differently. The sequence plays with a lot of voiceover on images of Banks Casino, so we can kind of see the lay of the land. This is a very classic thing. In Bob Le Flambeur, they mark it out in a field, which is pretty cool. Like, how you're going to walk this many steps. I think they string.
Yeah, it's a great movie too, by the way. I love that movie. Like, it's just part of that. And you mentioned, I'm a butcher, Rififi.
Yeah.
The Melville movies of that time. I don't think Melville didn't make Bob the Gambler. I believe that was somebody else, but it's part of that French New Wave.
Yeah.
This era it's like a sub genre of the French New Wave, and genre for lack of a better term, that like is the French New Wave crime flick.
Yeah.
That were so good. Like, so good.
So good and so influential. And they create so much suspense with so little. But again, like they're providing this template for laying it out and then walking through it. So instead of seeing the criminals walking through the heist in a field, which is such a wonderful image, we actually use all these voiceovers. So they're talking about it, where we're magically transported to inside the casino and we see where they're going to be. That's okay. It gets a little confusing in that it also includes flashbacks of Danny and Rusty explaining bits to Saul. So then I got a little lost in it was a little bit of the what's the movie with the spinning top?
Oh, Inception.
It's a little bit of the Inception thing where levels upon levels. Like, wait, where are we in the timeline? Where's Roman and where's Saul? Any rate, I think it's a reasonably sound approach. At a basic level, you can always tell bad writing when one character explains something to another character that character would already know. So one solution is to bring in another character who wouldn't know and explain it to them.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny. That was always, to go off a deep end here, I remember the thing that drove me nuts, amongst many things that drove me nuts in the short while that I watched The Walking Dead, is that like most of the characters stood around being like, I wonder what Rick's doing. And that's bad writing. When they're explaining something or wondering what somebody more interesting is up to, and that's all they can do.
Yeah.
But any time you put a camera in Eddie Izzard is generally a good idea. Entertaining, just charismatic, and pretty great. The problem is that, like you said, it does get a little long. It does get a little tedious, and it does bring out the problem that I had with the chemistry problem of Rusty and Danny making him walk through troubleshoot to them, saying like, well, you must have the problem with the dice. And then they say, no, we got the dice covered. We've got da-da-da. He's like, oh, well, then your problem must be the slot machines. And he's like, no, actually, we have this, and that. It's like, just tell him what the problem is. Like, why are you wasting this guy's time? Yes. He said he's only here for a day. Like, just get to the point already.
It probably would have played better if they actually had a few legitimate problems that he would have helped them with along the way. Instead, they get all the way to the end. They're like, no, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. That's not a problem. And then they get to the big problem. And Roman's like, well, I'm out because you can't solve that problem.
Right. It's really, it's really cutesy. And it's how the Ocean's movies function, and I'm aware of that. That's kind. It's like we said about the world, and that's how the Ocean's world, the speaking mannerisms in the Ocean's world is. It's a little bleak. It's a little cutesy. It's really clever. This is the kind of things that they're doing. But this one was just it went on a little too long, and it kind of, for me, exposed a little bit of the problems. Like, it's too complex. There's too many problems. There's too much troubleshooting. There's too much clever cutesiness along the way. And it just took a long time to get through that scene. I think they played it well. I think it was a good idea to get Reiner and to have that level and layer so people understand and it makes sense why they're telling this. It was smart. It was just too much of it. And I think that's something that Ocean's 13 kind of suffers from, that, like we said, like the David Paymer thing, who I love him. He's always great. But it was just a hat on a hat on a hat at a certain point that you just, sometimes you just got to take a hat off.
It was a bit much of a muchness. Well, speaking of Paymer, another kind of exposition thing that wasn't verbal is when the whole joke. So the Paymer character is the VUP. He's not actually named. The VUP stands for very unimportant person, because he gets dissed in line and makes a kind of a complaint. And so that's how he's referred to in the script for the film. He's the guy, the inspector, the award judge or whatever, who's going to inspect the bank casino and see if it measures up to the 5 diamond standard. And this was a subplot that I feel so mixed on, because Paymer plays it well. It's relatively funny, but it's also a little juvenile. Probably could have done without it. It takes up quite a bit of time. They make a little reference to torturing him, but we don't know anything more than that until we see them sabotaging his room, essentially. And they're wearing gloves and masks, and they're taking things out of vials and pouring them on his bed. And then there's this kind of montage, and Soderbergh wasn't sure. I guess even he gets a little lost with exposition sometimes, and he just wasn't sure what to do. So he just shot a lot of scenes of them kind of doctoring the room, and then dumped it in editor Stephen Marioni's lap and told him to make it as weird as possible. And he pulled it off. That one works, I think, because it's a setup, not a payoff. It's exposition, and that we know they're messing with this guy, but nobody's standing around saying, well, first we're going to put some bed bugs in there, and then we're going to do this and that. And then the payoff happens 10 minutes later. So just that one's purely, the preceding one was not purely spoken, but it was really about finding visual solutions for all the dialogue. This one just eliminates dialogue almost altogether.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, you said it perfectly. There's nothing more to add. I would just wonder what this movie would be like if you took that out completely. You can still introduce the Five Diamonds because they need to do that heist once you get Benedict in the mix. But like, if you cut Paymer's character out completely, I don't know that it would matter. I don't think you lose anything at all.
You'd lose the fart jokes, Mike.
True. That's true. I do like fart jokes.
Maybe, Soderbergh does a lot of recutting of his films. I wonder if he would ever have second thoughts and do the non-Paymer cut. Doubt it.
I doubt it.
Seriously doubt it. So about 47 minutes into the movie, we do kind of get the Ocean's 11 style chalk talk. Benedict agrees to provide financial backing, but demands they steal Banks' diamonds, double his investment, and pay him first, escalating the stakes. And then around 47 minutes in, we have Ebert's caper scene, kind of, because they're still not telling us everything. But inside the drill that is slowly tunneling toward Banks Casino, Danny and Rusty explain the jewel heist to Saul, Livingston, Linus, Frank, Turk, and Basher. So about half of the team. As Soderbergh points out, these scenes are not only hard to film, but it's hard for an actor to deliver exposition when there's no narrative or action to tie it together. I mean, that's really hard acting to do. Just give the blackboard lecture. So apparently he tried several approaches to filming it, which weren't really working, before sending everyone off to lunch and then trying to block it with stand-ins. Finally, he removed the table they were gathered around and put himself with the camera in its place. A very simple solution. And that allowed him to turn the camera around in a circle. And he brought the actors back and they were done in 2 hours. It just basically was like, yep, do the dialogue. I'm going to pan around and we're done. Soderbergh often tries to put as many of the gang in the frame as possible, which is simply an economical way of dealing with so many actors with so much exposition. I mean, imagine if you were cross-cutting that thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little much. It would be much for sure. But it's like, it's strange, not strange to me, but it's a little bit puzzling to me, because one of the things that we praised, if you remember in the Ocean's 11 episode, was the chalk talk scene was absolutely a masterclass of staging and exposition. You get enough, Danny lays out, okay, this is the Bellagio vault, and here's how we go in, here's why it's impossible, and everybody recognizes it's impossible, but we're going to do it anyway. And everyone's staged around the room, and as Soderbergh said, they all place themselves, stage themselves, basically. So, I mean, what a miracle that is. Yeah. And remarkable. But like, it's funny that, I mean, look, just because you do something once doesn't mean you've cracked it forever. But like, it's, I think it goes to speak to what 12 and 13 struggle with. And again, we're going back to you can't pull the rabbit out of the same hat twice. It struggles with trying to figure out how to do Ocean's 11 again without doing Ocean's 11 again. Yeah. And Ocean's 11 works because it's like we say, one of the things we love about Soderbergh is that it's very simple and it's very clear. And by the end, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I see how they did that. It all makes sense. The fake, vault, the double kind of heist where they're going back in as the the SWAT team, whatever you want to call them, the tactical team. And you get it by the end. We're 12 and 13, like you said, you were either scratching your head, recognizing they didn't play fair, or a little bit of both. And so it goes to show that trying to explain it in a scene, trying to have, like you said, the chalk talk scene is really hard because it's not as clean as 11 was.
Yeah, absolutely. And as to solving the same problem twice, I mean, I remember the first time I wrote a book and I started writing my second book, I thought, well, now I know how to write a book. And I realized I didn't know how to write a book at all. Each time you relearn it. So each one brings new challenges. And then I think sometimes too, you're just fatigued and you forget things you've already learned.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you never, what is it called? You never cross the same river twice, or you never step in the same river twice. Yeah. I mean, things change, you change, everything's changing. And I think that's it's natural for him to have that kind of issue.
Not that I want to say that Steven Soderbergh ever gets tired, because
no, I don't think he does. Although he does, again, seem to have a sense of humor about everything that's happening despite the challenges. Because, I mean, one of my favorite, maybe not my favorite moments, but a moment that I love, it's like another in-joke, like the Bourne thing, is where, you know, Rusty, where they realize they have to enlist Benedict, and the movie comes really self-aware because Brad Pitt says, I was hoping we could avoid him this time. And he's talking obviously about this heist, but I also feel like he's talking about this movie.
Well, I think it's close to that place in the movie too, where Basher says, "You don't do the same gag twice."
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. As you say, the movie has become sentient and self-aware.
We wrote that for Don, that you don't do the same gag twice, you got to do the next gag, because Don was so aware of the idea. This is the third movie.
Yes.
He wanted to not have Basher be the same, and so after talking to him, we gave him that line. When he read it, he was like, "Oh, someone, you're listening." So he didn't say it in a British accent.
He just said no. He didn't.
Don Cheadle sort of a voice.
He just
You guys are listening to me.
Just a couple other quick notes on exposition. You know, he often tries to get extra mileage out of exposition. There's a scene at about 1 hour, 11 minutes where Bank is walking into the casino, and basically it's a crowd shot. And he says on the commentary that he's just kind of trying to get more out of an expositional scene, because Bank is talking while he's walking in the casino, but he could do a real tight shot, but he makes it wider and makes it a lot busier. He claims that they shot at night and tented it with light blown in so it looks like day, which, if true, is unbelievable because it looks absolutely like daytime. He said it was the middle of the night. But it does give you the sense of this casino as this busy, bustling place, which is important for the kind of world building. So, I mean, I think that also makes sense. Soderbergh has spoken elsewhere, too, about just trying to go the extra mile, pull off a shot that looks better, do a longer, more continuous shot. Don't take the easy way out. And there are so many directors who continually take the easy way out. So here he may have a relatively simple bit of exposition to deliver while Bank is walking in, but what else can he do while he does that? And then it happens again. When Clooney and Pacino are talking with the sumo wrestlers behind them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you have boxing in one movie, you get sumo wrestlers in another, but again, you're using the casino environment. You're taking advantage of everything around you. You're just brightening up the background of what could just be two guys talking to each other. We hear what they're saying. We don't need a close-up on their face. The scene playing out behind them is much more interesting. And as he said, this isn't a direct quote, but he said something like, you know, what's the point if you're not using all the stuff that you have available to you? And then the final thing I just wanted to bring up is a scene that I really, really love. And I thought the genesis of it was actually quite clear, and he admits in the director's commentary. So around an hour and 14 minutes, the heist begins to go down. And there's a great, classy split screen sequence, very glamorous looking. And apparently that was originally not split screen, but he just felt like it was playing out too slowly. You know, shot after shot after shot. We know what's happening. People are in all sorts of different parts of the casino. Shit's about to go down. And he was kind of struggling with it, he says, and he was at home, and the Thomas Crown Affair came on, the original, which has some great use of split screen. And he gave it to his editor, Marioni, and said, you know, watch Thomas Crown Affair. And Marioni, 36 hours later, delivers a cut that includes all the visual information of the original, but is also half as much screen time.
Wow. That's really cool. And it reminds me of actually Ocean's 11. If you remember when the heist goes down, he never uses the same shot twice.
Yeah.
Never goes back to the same. Whenever he switches perspectives or whatever, it's a little bit different. So and that's another way just to quicken things up, which is, you know, a good thing in, you know, this type of situation, is to keep that pace and keep that tempo. And it's cool that he found another way to do it here.
It keeps the screen alive. It keeps you from feeling like you know what's coming next. I mean, he has said that he tries to always avoid repeating a shot, but he wouldn't take it to ridiculous extremes. There are times in maybe two characters speaking that you are going to cut back to the same shot, but he really tries not to do that. Having talked about all this exposition, Mike, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how closely did you follow the plot of Ocean's 13? And how well do you think other viewers did? Are most people just enjoying the banter and set pieces, or are they like, oh, I see what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, for my money, like, how close did I follow it? Not at all. I mean, I got it, but like the double, triple crosses, however many crosses there are, the things that Danny somehow anticipates and plans for, and oh goodness, I mean, the end. I mean, once you get to like, Linus's, I was waiting for Linus's cousin to show up, like I was waiting.
Love child.
I was waiting for Ben Affleck. That's all I was missing was Ben Affleck to show up as his brother, cousin, or whatever. And that would have really completed the circle of his family.
Trying to drag Linus back to Southie.
Yeah. But like, once you get to like, burrowing into Linus's family, and there's all the stuff that like Danny's like, aha, but I planned for that, and you're like, how did you? I mean, the stuff when he's like getting into the Night Fox's head, basically, of like what he's going to do.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the mental gymnastics and the suspension of disbelief is asking a lot of you to actually follow completely. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it, because I did to a certain degree. I wasn't as frustrated. Again, we keep going back to 12. I feel like we're just kicking this poor movie, which, like I said, I did enjoy more as I watched it more, and now came back to it with a little bit more maturity and saw more what it was doing. But I feel like this movie at least played a little bit more fair with the audience than 12 did. Not a ton fair, but more. And so I did enjoy it, but it's still both movies. And again, this goes back to the simplicity and beauty of 11. Like these movies really twist your brain into a pretzel, and it's tough, and I don't know the mileage that gets with viewers. I mean, you have to know. I mean, there's a reason why, and we'll talk about this later, there are diminishing returns with these films. I think part of it, the diminishing returns. I mean, there's an interesting thought experiment of like, if 12 never happened, because that was, like I said, we gave it a fair shake, and it's been rediscovered. But that movie was reviled when it came out. Like that had a stench on that thing. Was toxic waste. In terms of like, don't go near it. Anymore. Yeah. So if that never happened, how would have 13 fared if they just stayed in Vegas? I think probably better. But like, there's a reason why there are still the diminishing returns, and 12 might be part of it, but also part of it might be, like you said, how well do you follow it, and how much do you have to suspend your disbelief as an audience? And the more and more you have to suspend, and the more you're stretching the narrative rules and the narrative boundaries. Did I ever tell you, and I'll tell you this quickly, because we mentioned Inception. And one of my favorite theatrical experiences is I went to see, I think it was the second time I saw it, and I was seated in front of this older couple, and I couldn't leave. It was a pretty crowded theater. And this older gentleman, the entire time during this movie, was just like, like just utterly, like, just every new level of the dream. He's just like, oh my God, like he just was audibly groaning and disgusted through the whole thing. And then finally, spoilers, guys, sorry, when it gets to the end and the top is spinning and you're like, don't know if it's gonna fall or not, and it cuts to black, and in the silent movie theater, this old man goes, oh, what now?
That's so funny.
So,
and I like Inception, or as I call it, the movie with the top.
I love Inception, but it goes to show, audience members are only going to follow you so far with the suspension of disbelief. And, each subsequent volume of Oceans is asking you to suspend a little bit more and a little bit more. And 13 does get pretty ridiculous by the end.
I mean, to Soderbergh's credit and his writer's credit, the things do hold together, which is amazing. They go to great lengths to try to make sure that the logic holds together. But I agree. I just don't think that many people follow it. Honestly, it takes me 2 or 3 watches of each film before the whole thing really hangs together in my mind. But again, credit to them for at least making sure it holds together, even if audiences probably don't follow them closely in real time. Moving on from Soderbergh's techniques for exposition, I want to talk briefly about his filmmaking practices that support exposition, because I found this very interesting in the director's commentary. His commentaries are great, and I have an idea for a Patreon episode one of these days. I think we need to rank Soderbergh's director's commentaries.
Oh man, did you say Patreon here?
Patreon, big job. But at any rate,
can we? Oh, never mind. I was going to spoil something, but I think we both agree, and we won't say it because this will be saved for the Patreon. We both know what number 1 is.
Yes. Oh yeah. We definitely know what number 1 is.
Okay.
But his director's commentaries are just so great because he talks so frankly about, it's a film school. If you want to learn how to make movies, you could do worse, and it'd be a lot cheaper than a lot of these master classes, or certainly going to UCLA. Listen to every director's commentary of every Steven Soderbergh film, and you're going to learn a lot about the craft of filmmaking. One of his practices is that he watched, while making Ocean's 13, the assembled cut repeatedly. He always does that, but for 13, he watched a minimum of 3 times a week and kept watching it to make sure that everything they had done so far was linking up. That takes discipline and hard work, but it's something anybody can do. It's kind of like if you're a novelist, rereading your chapters up to the current point, make sure it hangs together. He also often watched the day's footage without audio. We've talked before about his silent black and white cut of Raiders of the Lost Ark and how it proves Spielberg's movie is its own masterclass in visual storytelling. And I know in my own script writing, I've certainly always tried to make sure that the images alone can tell the story. I think I might have mentioned this on an earlier pod, but my dad taught filmmaking in high school, and he was teaching high school sophomores, juniors, and seniors about Eisenstein's theory of montage. I learned that as a teenager, and for my earliest scripts, I would always try to make sure that it hung together without the dialogue. And again, I think that's an excellent practice for any filmmaker, and it's one that he continues to do.
Yeah, and I think I love that story, and it's so true. And I think, actually, I know, from my own experience, from directing a film that I wrote, it was such a Jekyll and Hyde experience, because writing, you're like, how much good stuff can I get in, especially with dialogue and, describing things really well and making sure the pacing is there, all this sort of stuff that you're trying to do in the script. How much can I get in? And then as a director, like, how much can I get out? Like, how much can I pull out of this? What can I just show? This especially goes for the dialogue. Like, how is it being shown? Is it being seen? Okay, we don't need to say it. Cut it. I cut so much out of the script when I got to the directing chair, and I was like, oh, it just, if this were a different writer, I would have felt actually bad. But luckily it was, from myself. So instead of like any sort of guilt, it was just such a learning experience, which is similar to what you learned with your dad, which is such a valuable experience and such a valuable tool. And that's filmmaking 101. And it's like, learning that as a teenager, I'm sure was eye-opening for you.
Absolutely eye-opening. I think younger Soderbergh was more ruthless about cutting. We've talked about the length of this one, 18 movies in. Maybe he's not quite as hard on himself as usual. But again, he's still a master at what he does, and he's always trying to make sure that the movie hangs together with images alone. It's a visual medium. And then another thing is he's always talked about doing reshoots. Probably on all of his films, he's done reshoots. And again, if you listen to the director's commentaries on almost any of his films, he'll say, oh, we shot later, that we shot later. Sometimes that's hilarious because it's like, oh, we did this in my apartment and painted one wall or whatever. He's just very hands-on, as we know. He doesn't send, a second unit director. He does it himself. He goes to London to shoot Matt Damon, right? But he just is always thinking about, is this clear? And then if something is needed, he'll go back and add it, even if he has to reshoot it. And that's just, again, staying alert, working hard, refusing to accept that something is good enough. Bad writers and filmmakers blame audiences for not understanding, and great ones make sure they understand.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that like we've said it time and time again, he is very keen and very sharp on clarity and making sure. And you're right. I mean, for as implausible as like Ocean's 13 is, and I trust you, I didn't do the same legwork that you did, but I trust the work that you did. Absolutely. And I believe that like it may be stretching things, but it's still, I would believe if you go back, if you it's math, if you check your work, if you check Soderbergh's work, it's all going to be there. And I absolutely trust that in him. And I trust in you saying that you did check the work.
I mean, yeah, I feel I certainly could have missed a plot hole, but I'm always a little bit of a logic hound. And so I feel like if there's so many movies where like, oh yeah, that's not going to hold together. That's not going to hold together. It takes, like I said, I think these are a little overstuffed and it takes me a few watches to get it all together. But I think that he and the writers really take great pride in making sure that it does track if you follow the threads.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really, not everyone does that.
The satisfactions of these kinds of movies are weird because they're mousetraps, and so you don't really, until they're done, for me they're not satisfying until we have all of the pieces and it's all done and all of the music is finished. But at that point, it's so close to no longer belonging to me that moment is just so fleeting. I feel like it's 2 days where the movie's done and I can see it finished and all this work is finished, and literally in the next moment I'm handing it over to Warner Brothers or to everyone else. Like, it's not mine anymore.
Generally, critics liked Ocean's 13 better than Ocean's 12 and not as much as Ocean's 11, just like us. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars. He gave the previous movies 3 stars apiece. I think he docked it 0.5 star both for the aforementioned reasons and because he could no longer suspend his disbelief. To quote him, he says, "Fair enough if it's done with energy and style. If, however, their plan involves elements that are preposterously impossible, I feel as if I'm watching one of Scrooge McDuck's schemes." I mean, it's funny to me, as we said, that, he was fine with Ocean's 12 and this was a bridge too far. Yes, the Ocean's movies are preposterous, but at least the Ocean's universe is consistently preposterous. Our favorite, Manola Dargis of the New York Times, who we savaged at length for her misguided take on Bubble, actually liked it pretty well. She gave it 4 out of 5 stars and wrote, "The third time really is a charm. Ocean's 13 is also pretty much of a gas. It's lighter than air, prettier than life, a romp, a goof, and an attentively oiled machine." Okay, fair enough. But then she couldn't help herself, Mike. She just had to add this. "These movies bewitch precisely because they exist outside the prison house of realism that Soderbergh sometimes seems overly anxious to lock himself and his audiences into."
What is a prison house? Isn't a prison just a prison? Like, isn't a house by definition?
Artsy turn of phrase on your prison day.
Oh God! But all right, but it's funny. At the start of this episode, my brain got mixed up in thinking like, when do we talk about this review? And I didn't know if it was this episode or a coming episode because, dear listener, we record a few at a time. So our scripts become jumbled in our heads as they do with mine. So
much like a Soderbergh keeper film.
Yeah, exactly. I can't even keep, but yeah, he keeps track. I do not. So I'm offering, what's that called? The correction. While we're here, I'm going to talk about Manola in a second, but I have another correction because I've been saying Michael Curtiz and it's Michael Curtis.
Well, I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that. I looked it up. I was finding and this is not only this podcast, but years I've been saying Michael Curtiz. And I'm like, I wonder how you actually say it.
It is spelled with a Z.
Spelled with a Z. And when I saw it, it seems to be what I looked as Michael Curtis, but it's probably Curtiz. I think would be a more Curtis is Americanized from whatever it was,
Yeah.
So I think we're not wrong, but not right. We're somewhere in that middle area.
I want to add that little sparkly rainbow sound. The more you know.
But anyway, Manola, like I said, like other critics, just takes Soderbergh way more seriously than I think he even takes himself. Like, it's a weird phenomenon. I'm not saying he's not a smart person or that he's not, as smart as people think. That's not where I'm going at all. But he gets this label, and oftentimes, and I think in our shared opinion, unfairly, as this like cold intellectual, dead set on capturing some kind of grim, true reality. Like he's just always aiming for this, not darkness, but like she says, this like prison house of realism. And it just like, she just is like leaping over so many movies that are out of sight, Aaron Brockovich, etc., that are really fun and engaging. And shit, the very movie she's reviewing.
Yeah, could not agree more. Anyway, to sample just a few more, Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly called it a delectably elaborate and savory souffle of a mother of all scams sequel. All right. Keith Phipps of the AV Club gave it a B+, and Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader called it predictably adolescent and smarmy, while concluding that this chewing gum for the eyes and ears was not bad as such. So we kind of liked it.
It
wasn't bad.
Glowing.
Yeah, that's glowing.
From Rosenbaum.
4 stars from Rosenbaum. But there were plenty of dissents. Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune called it smug. Rex Reed of the Observer called it flat. And Kenneth Turan of the LA Times said, quote, "The thrill of the original is gone and nothing can bring it back." End quote. As a wise man once said, your mileage may vary. Mike, how did it go at the box office?
Well, it was released on June 8th, 2007, and it spent 29 weeks in theaters and played in 3,565 theaters in its widest release. It grossed roughly $117 million domestic and $194 million international for a worldwide haul of more than $311 million. Interestingly, its budget was only $85 million, which is a lot lower than the Ocean's 12 budget of $110 million.
That is interesting. I mean, I know the 12 budget was a big jump up from 11, but it's interesting that it came back down because, I mean, I guess you don't have to pay Roberts and Zeta Jones, but you still got to, I presume all the other cast members could be negotiating a little increase because the movies are so successful.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if I remember correctly, Ocean's 11, I believe, was $60 or $70 million budget. So, it's up from there, but it's also a good, 8 years later, whatever it is. So there's obviously some inflation going on. But like, I think that and I'm just kind of a shot in the dark, I feel like Ocean's 12 probably suffered from locations, not just being in Europe, but there's a lot of locations.
Yeah.
13 stays pretty tight to a few places, which makes it faster and slimmer and just easier to maneuver. 12 is a lumbering thing with like so many different spots.
That's an excellent point. And that could explain the difference alone. I mean, the Bank Casino in 13 is a set. They do use actual locations in Vegas too, but a ton of their shooting is on sets.
Yeah.
Well, I just want everybody to remember that number that Mike said, 3,565 theaters, when we talk about our next film next week, Che.
It's a little less.
just a few fewer theaters.
This is the last one.
The last of the trilogy. Dave.
How many trilogies have 4 movies in them?
Right. That's why this is the
it's
last.
It's like your fifth quadrant.
This is the last of the trilogy.
In the commentary for 13, recorded after photography had wrapped on Che, Soderbergh was adamant that he was through and done with Ocean's 13. But then in June 2021, Entertainment Weekly quoted Don Cheadle as saying, quote, "We were talking about it, and then Bernie passed, and very quickly we were like, no, we don't want to do it. But I just did a movie with Steven, and he said, I think there may be a way to do it again. I'm thinking about it." And it didn't go much further than that. But I don't know. I don't know who all would be in it. I imagine the main group of us would be in. It would be very interesting to see. Now, that's 3 years old, and it's not very conclusive, but maybe there's an Ocean's 20 waiting for us. Or an Ocean's 4. Mike, on July 3rd, we recorded a reaction video about Beverly Hills Cop Axel F., and we talked extensively about franchises. Would you want to see another Oceans movie?
As a matter of fact, I would. Though I'd want, if there were another installment, and obviously we're jumping over Ocean's 8, which is kind of its own thing. But if we were to see Soderbergh come back, which Soderbergh didn't direct, he produced, but he didn't direct Ocean's 8. If he came back to direct another Ocean's movie, I'd want him to mix it up. And actually, Keir, I have a pitch.
Oh, a pitch.
Yes.
Okay,
here's it goes. I want you got to really judge this.
Okay, I'm chomping on a cigar. I've got my feet up on the desk, and I've got my best mogul face on.
Make it a wrestling picture. So here goes. Danny Ocean's divorced, restless, and wants to get back in the game, but is the only member of the gang who feels this way. So he needs new blood. So we go the route of like Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol and kind of softly reboot the franchise, giving it a little bit of a fresh spin, a new crew, and an all new heist. Not Vegas, not a meta heist, something all new. And we take your cue from earlier and call it Ocean's 10. Maybe even actually, now that I think about it, Ocean's 9, because we're going to save money on casting. And you can't replace either Bernie Mac or Carl Reiner. It's impossible. You can't do it. So you don't try. You go Ocean's 9. There's your movie.
A minute ago, I would have answered my own question with a no, but after that pitch, okay, Mike, I'm in. Let's get an all-new gang back together. Listeners, how do you rank the Oceans trilogy? Be sure to let us know. You can reach us on Instagram at The Filmographers, or on X at FilmographerPod, and on Letterboxd at Filmographers. Or just send us a good old-fashioned email at thefilmographerspodcast@gmail.com.
If you enjoy our podcast, please show your support by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. Every dollar makes it easier for us to produce this show and share our passion for movies with you. Thank you in advance.
And thanks, as always, to Kevin Lau, our producer, Gompson, who composed and played our theme music, and Cosmo Graff, who designed our logo.
Join us next week on the Filmographers podcast when we'll discuss Soderbergh's two-part, 4.5-hour ode to the man most people know only as a really cool-looking t-shirt, Che Guevara.